I'm Nick Knudsen, joined by Will Miles. Welcome to Stand Up and Holler. On tonight's episode, we'll go over the final four Gators since 1990. Nine quarterbacks. Couple of you got some quarterbacks mixed in there, but we'll work our way through it. We'll work our way through it. Napier confirms Miles Graham will miss some time with an injury. We'll talk about that. The SEC says to run it back for 2025. What does that mean for Florida? And we'll look at Will Miles' article on that predicament for the Florida Gators. So tough schedule in 24. Flip it, flip the home and aways for 2025, and we'll get to it here, Will. Um, hey, Final Four Gators since 1990, non-quarterbacks. We put the non-quarterback designation in there because we would just see a bunch of lists with Tebow and Warfel, and we all love the quarterbacks. Shane Matthews, a lot of great quarterbacks have come through the University of Florida. Chris Lake, right, in recent years. So we wanted to mix it up and give some love to the position guys. So we did get a comment here. I'm going to put up your comments up on the screen. Not going to read all the screen names for the sake of time, but I will put you up on the screen if you made a comment for this here. So our first comment is, how did you guys forget about Chris Leak for the post-2000 quarterbacks? And we didn't. We love Chris Leak. Will wrote a big article on Chris Leak. Maybe I'll have to put that in the show notes there, Will, but we're big Chris Leak fans. Just no quarterbacks here. The next comment here, Tebow, Harvin, Spikes, Ratliff. You got us going with the final three here. Obviously, Tebow would be the top of most people's lists, along with, I would think Harvin would be in strong contention there, but Harvin, Spikes, and Ratliff certainly a good start there for us. Well, we're going to keep it rolling here on into the next comment. Percy Harvin, Reggie Nelson, Dallas Baker, and Brandon James. Watching James return kicks was so fun. I couldn't agree more, Will. Special teams, got to get a little love for the special teams. We had some other, I think we had a kicker in one of these coming up here soon. But we've had some good returners since James. I think DeBose had a couple of memorable returns. Callaway's certainly lethal at times, but nobody was quite like Brandon James, and he could really flip the game for those 2006 Gators. So it's good to see some special teams love here for his contributions.
Yeah, well, I mean, Brandon James is one of those guys who the offense was lethal anyway when he was there. And then you add him to it. He just sort of terrorized Tennessee, which at the time was really, really entertaining. So that was always fun to watch. And, given what we've seen on special teams in Gainesville the last couple of years, I can understand why people would have an affinity towards excellent special teams, returns without blocks in the back, having the right number of guys on the field, that sort of stuff. So I understand why people are pining for the days of Brandon James.
I would love to see just one or two guys every single year just being that designated kick return guy, just the speed freaks that come in and can really make a difference and be that Brandon James guy. Because Brandon James was never going to be the full-time running back in Gainesville, although he was good enough where he did get some play at running back down the road. But specifically for special teams, I would love to see more guys like Brandon James come into the program. Will, staying in the Urban Meyer era, very Urban Meyer heavy in some of these comments here. Ahmad Black, obviously hell of a player, key piece of those urban secondaries. Brandon Spikes, Dominique Easley, and Percy Harvin, all great picks. Easley was definitely a force along the defensive front.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's been a long time since Florida's had guys like guys like Dominique Easley there up front. Obviously, with Sharif Floyd there at the exact same time. Some of those defenses back in the 14, 15, 16 range were just nasty. And the fact that Florida couldn't figure out a way to get out of their own way on offense it's almost like the reverse of the 2020 year, where you had Kyle Trask, Kyle Pitts, and Kadarius Toney going up and down the field, and the defense couldn't get out of its own way. It's just sort of haven't been able to pair those things up at the same time in Gainesville in a while. And those guys, though, obviously, you talk about up front, you talk about making the quarterback uncomfortable, and Easley and Floyd were two of the best.
For as frustrating as the last decade and a half has been here in Gainesville, there have been moments where either side of the ball has been dominant for stretches. So we just haven't been able to pair it together. All right, we have a little local bias, Will. So all local players here, all he calls them in the comments, all local area players that were superstars. Alex Brown, Gerard Warren, Keith Kelsey, Reggie McGrew, Duke Dawson, and Travis McGriff were listed here. Hey, Alex Brown, during his 4-year college career, 161 total tackles, 47 tackles for a loss, sixth best career total in Florida history. And he set the Gators' current record for 33 quarterback sacks. He was inducted to the University of Florida Athletic Hall of Fame and as a Gator great in 2012. But Will, you knew all that. I want to know where Alex Brown went to high school.
Hamilton County High School.
Hamilton County High School. All right, you got that one. All right. Gerard Warren, where did he go to high school?
Union County.
Union County, you had that one. All right. The big man, number 3 overall pick by the Browns in the 2001 NFL draft. You're not going to get this one here. Linebacker, 96 to 99, 187 tackles, 22.5 tackles for a loss. That's Keith Kelsey out of
Newberry.
everyone
Come
knows
on,
that,
man.
right? Everyone knows that. All right. Reggie McGrew along the defensive front. Solid player up there for the Gators. Out of
Mayo Lafayette, man.
everyone knows that. Everyone knows that, man. Duke Dawson. Damn it. Well, I'm gonna get you on one of these here. Duke Dawson. Uh, Obviously great player during the McElwain years. There had some good big plays in some big games. Six interceptions, 3 interception returns for a touchdown. Duke Dawson, solid Gator. Out of
Dixie County.
Dixie County, Dixie County High School. And last but not least, we got Travis McGriff out of
PK Young High School.
Gainesville, Florida, baby. All right, 1998, the Florida Gators wide receiver had 70 receptions, 123 on the career, 70 in that senior season for 1,300 yards and 10 touchdowns. Travis McGriff, legacy Gator as well, but definitely a solid choice there. Like those local picks there. Moving forward here, Harvin, Spikes, Pitts, and then torn between a handful of others, but I love Reggie Nelson. I love this one, Will. I'm very much in line with a lot of these picks. Reggie Nelson was definitely a name I'd kicked around as well. What do you think about this one?
So, I mean, Nelson is one of the most fun players to watch. I don't know that he fits the profile of best, but certainly from an impact perspective and what he was able to do, and the fact that it's the only time that Gary Danielson has ever not talked about Alabama during a CBS broadcast when Florida was involved. He loved talking about the eraser back there. So Nelson at least brought Florida some pub that the Crimson Tide couldn't get.
You never felt like we were going to get beat deep with Reggie Nelson back there. I was bummed out he didn't work out in Jacksonville too much, but ended up having a solid NFL career anyway. All right, here's another one. Little basketball commentary on the front end here. Will, I thought the same thing about Florida's number 7 seed. Whoops, we don't have to talk about that one. We can skip that one. Then again, maybe the NCAA knows something we don't. I mean, look at how well they've orchestrated it. I like that comment. All right. Percy Harvin, number 1. Kyle Pitts, number 2. Kejuan Ratliff, number 3. And Eddie Pinheiro, some love for the kicker. Certainly a critical player during those McElwain years. If I recall correctly, was he an Alabama flip too, Will?
Yeah, well, and he scored like 95% of the points that Doug Nussmeier was able to put on the board while he was in Gainesville. Not a lot of touchdowns scored while Pinheiro was on the roster.
Yeah, good. Some good memories of Pinheiro. We've had some solid kickers throughout the years. I will say that. Some guys floating around the NFL for a while there. All right. Next comment here. Harvin, Fred Taylor. I would assume not Travis Taylor. We got Travis Taylor had some solid years, but we'll go with Fred Taylor. Riedel Anthony and Ike Hilliard. Certainly some love for the Spurrier years, especially with Green in the mix there. All three of those guys were incredible. But for the next one, he did not forget Mr. Green. So we got Harvin, Green, Anthony, and then for the fourth, we got a tie. A lot of debating for that fourth spot for some of us because that's how it was for Will and I as well. We went back and forth quite a bit on that fourth spot. But Harvin, Green, Anthony, Spikes, and Rhett. Some love for Eric Rhett as well. Eric Rhett was a little before my time as a Gator, Will, but I've certainly seen the highlights, and I certainly remember that he was pretty solid running back for a long time in Tampa Bay.
Yeah, and I mean a big part of Florida putting things together at the early stages of the Spurrier run. I think that's sort of the thing is Tampa was so awful when Rhett became a quarterback or became the running back there that it's one of those things where that's kind of what sticks in my mind about Eric Rhett, not necessarily his time at Florida. Again, kind of just because of our age more than anything.
Yeah. Yeah, Will was in school for the Zook years. I was in school for the Meyer years. So little, but certainly
So
have
you
a
win.
certainly an appreciation for the Spurrier years as well. All right, next one here: Fred Taylor, Ike Hilliard, Javon Curse, the Freak, uh, Tennessee Titan, longtime Tennessee Titan, and Marquise Pouncey. Curse and Pouncey, certainly a couple names we were kicking around as well. Will.
Yeah, I mean, look, those are two of the best to do it there at Florida. Curse was just obviously his nickname, right? The Freak. He did stuff that we hadn't seen before. And honestly, I think that's sort of again this. So I took a little bit different approach. I looked at it as which guys got honored the most. And I think a lot of folks took this as which guys were the most fun to watch, like which were the most dynamic players to watch. And I can understand going either way. So, Curse certainly fits that profile.
All right, last couple here, and then we'll give our selections. Ike Hilliard, Anthony. So Hilliard, Anthony, see a lot of those. Alex Brown and Eric Rhett. Certainly, we covered Alex Brown and Rhett already. These all great selections here, all from the '90s. Uh, Last comment here, just a general comment. Matt Elam never gets enough love. Will Elam, great safety for the Gators. Always remember that play along the sideline against LSU in the swamp.
Well, especially since it was Odell Beckham Jr., right? Going down the sideline, looked like it was going to completely flip the game, and it did. It completely flipped the game in Florida's favor. So yeah, certainly the one we remember. But again, you mentioned Nelson sort of roaming around back there, not being worried about it. It was the same thing with those guys. And what was it, Marcus May on the other side? Those guys really sort of a great tandem. One being able to take the run, the other guy being able to be back there in coverage. And that one didn't work out in the NFL for a slightly different reason. But we'll move on.
All right, we'll give our four Gators here, our final four. Percy's got to lead off the conversation. Percy Harvin, no doubt, big play, just all over. It's like you even said, not the best receiver we've had at Florida, best all around player in terms of being an explosive playmaker and a difference maker.
Yeah, I mean, look, we've been searching for the next Percy Harvin for, 20 years now almost. And we keep sort of telling ourselves that isn't possible. And one of the reasons it's not possible is because of the gifts he had. I mean, you look at them giving him the ball behind the line of scrimmage as a running back. You look at him, throwing a little hitch and off it goes to the house. How many times did you think he was going to get caught and then he beat the corners of the safeties by like 4 yards? Everybody remembers that little toss to Demps against Kentucky, but Percy Harvin did that stuff too, except for he was bigger and faster. And we all saw what happened to the offense when he hurt himself, or when he was hurt. In that Arkansas game in the SEC championship, having to gut through the Ohio State game for the championship. There's a true freshman. I mean, he came in, made a huge difference as a true freshman, more than Tebow, honestly. And so I understand why everyone points to Percy as the first guy off the board. And I think, in a different world, like you play the same in a different universe, you play the same career over and over and over again. And Harvin probably ends up in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, 50%, 70% of the time that he goes there. But obviously the migraines and some of the stuff that came out about substances after his career. But still, I mean, in terms of like when he got the ball in his hands, how electric he was. If we're going most fun Final Four, Harvin is on that list. If we go most skilled, Harvin's on that list. And then from a productivity perspective, Harvin was a guy who was all SEC. He was all American, and so certainly fits that bill, I think.
Yeah, special player. I've given up that there ever will be another Percy Harvin. So definitely a guy. So many talented players during this era too. So there's times where I almost feel like he. It's not that any Gator fan does not overlook Percy Harvin, but in the national conversation, he definitely gets passed up a little bit. But Florida fans know how great Percy Harvin was because we got to see the greatness firsthand. Brandon Spikes at linebacker, we got listed at number 2. Just a key piece of those defensive units that Tebow on those Tebow teams, and that '08 team was just a monster in the middle. And I gotta admit, I had a coworker that worked for Georgia when I worked up in New York, and I once I found that out, I set my background on my computer to Brandon Spikes on top of No Shot Marino after crushing him up the middle in that Florida Georgia game in 2008. So a lot of good memories with Brandon Spikes.
Well, you stole it. I was going to say no. Sean Marino thinks he's one of the best four Gators too. Certainly, Rome in the middle, setting the tone. We saw that in the Swamp Kings documentary. But the other thing is, he's got the hardware beyond just the national championships and that sort of stuff. Brandon Spikes was a unanimous All American selection in 2008. He was a consensus All American selection in 2009. So this is a guy who everyone didn't just look at the big plays, didn't just look at the leadership. This was a guy who everybody in the country looked at all the different services and said, this is the best linebacker in the country. And to roam the middle linebacker position, to be the Mike, to be able to do that sort of stuff in the SEC, that's a really big deal. And we've had some other linebackers in Gainesville who've been good. You think about guys like Alex Anzalone, Jared Davis, even David Reese. So you can get away with linebacker play that's not elite, but Spikes was just sort of the way he set that tone for that team or for those teams, and made sure that they were they were walking the line for the most part. Now he's back in town, obviously, and that doesn't make a difference, but the fact that he perceives himself as a Gator and embraces the fact that he's a Gator, I do think makes a difference when it comes to thinking about this sort of stuff, having guys like Harvin and Spikes around the program.
Number 3, we got Kyle Pitts, and Pitts was a very good player for most of his career, but then he became just something special during that 2020 season. Man, it would have been fun to see what that season would have looked like in a normal context. Obviously, 2020 was quite difficult outside of the field, but on the field, week in and week out, except LSU. We don't have to talk about that game, but except LSU. But week in and week out, Kyle Pitts just delivered and was something of the likes that we've never seen at the tight end position, and I think is well deserved to be on this list.
Well, I mean, look, he made Kyle Trask an awful lot of money with Trask being a second round draft pick of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Look, I think Trask earned it too, but Pitts, I mean, the enduring play for me, there was a play against Texas A&M early in the season where Pitts was running a wheel route down the left-hand side of the field and Trask got flushed to his right. He had a guy open in front of him, like a running back or somebody across the middle, probably would have been like a 15-yard gain. Instead, he decides to chuck the ball back across his body all the way to the end zone because he figures, Pitts is over there. I'll give him an opportunity. And it was actually a bad throw. Pitts wasn't able to bring it down. But the fact that he had that much faith in Kyle Pitts, and to be honest, I was kind of sitting there going, Pitts will get that one when he threw it up too. Again, unanimous All-American there in 2020. I think that makes a difference, right? It's you see these guys who are flashy. You see guys who make who make a play from time to time. Florida's had a lot of All-Americans, but when you've got someone who's a unanimous All-American like Pitts was in 2020, everybody knew he was the best tight end in the country. And quite honestly, the only reason he probably wasn't an All-American in 2019 is because nobody knew whether he was a tight end or a wide receiver at the time. And 2020, he comes back, he can block enough to where all of a sudden he's a threat. They start him out tight to the line of scrimmage, spread him out. LSU couldn't do anything with him that year in that game in Baton Rouge. So, obviously Pitts is one of the best players we've ever seen. Kind of fits in that Harvin thing, right? I mean, it's not just was he fun? It's not just was he have the best career. That's a guy who I'm gonna tell my kids about Kyle Pitts in college. Same thing with Harvin, and honestly, same thing with Spikes as well.
Number 4, we had a lot of debate. I don't even know if we totally agree on number 4, but I've read the rest, so I'm gonna let Will walk you through the logic. But just so you know, we had a lot of debate about this one, and look, statistically, not everything in a football game shows up on the stat sheet, and I'm gonna let Will walk you through the logic for number 4 here.
Well, so here's the deal. I mean, we heard a lot about Keywan Ratliff, and I think that's a great pick. We heard Joe Hayden, I think, was mentioned. I think that's a good pick too. But I went back and I looked at all the guys who were unanimous All-American selections. There was 1995 offensive tackle Jason Odom. He was also third team All-American in 1994. Jabbar Gaffney in 2001 at wide receiver. He was also third in 2000. You had Brandon Spikes in 2008, 2009. He was a consensus All-American, so that you were talking first team. Joe Hayden, 2009 at corner. You had Kyle Pitts in 2020, and then you had Vernon Hargraves, 2015, a unanimous All-American, and he was a first-team All-American in 2014, a number 1 draft pick when he goes to the NFL, and no one threw at him. And I think it's, the argument that I would make is that Hargraves was great from the moment he got to Gainesville, and you sort of took it for granted because nobody ever threw that direction. So there wasn't all the flashy interceptions and all the stuff that you think of. Like it wasn't like a Deion Sanders type impact. But if you really love football and you go out there and watch Vernon Hargraves, you saw a guy who was covered all the time, and all of his contemporaries thought he was the best corner in the country for basically 2 straight years. And that's why I have him there. Now, again, you look at you say Harvin, Spikes, Pitts, and Hargraves. We're really weighted towards the future, and I mean, I'd be perfectly okay with people going back to guys like Odom or Gaffney, or Ratliff and those sorts of things. I think we're sort of splitting hairs at this point, but I just look at it and I go, the NFL thought he was great when they looked at the tape. The media members who looked at it thought he was great. The players thought he was great because they didn't throw in that direction. Hargraves was a really good player, and I think in many ways because Florida wasn't that great when Hargraves was there, we were going through sort of the transition between Will Muschamp and Jim McElwain. The offenses obviously weren't great, and so I think he gets overlooked a little bit, but he was a damn good player.
Yeah, it was certainly our list. I like that you pointed that out because I believe that will get pointed out in the comment section that there's got to be a little more love for the guys in the '90s. Yeah, yeah, I agree. I agree. But four is tough. Some of you are cheating and putting five on there too. So we had a tough time
Well,
narrowing it down. But I like the exercise. It was fun. We normally don't do a lot of things where we ask people in the comments to comment on that, and that was a good exercise. I enjoyed that.
yeah, I'm sure we'll get roasted, and that's fine because look, here's the deal. We're younger than people who were in school in the 90s, and they probably look and go, "Well, I remember you had Green, Anthony, and Hilliard out there, and nobody could guard them." Yeah, absolutely. Um,
I just
I'm
have those
not
guys in my head as such a dynamic trio that's
well.
hard to separate one of them. That
Well,
that was
and you
I
got
wanted to work those guys in, but it was hard to. They're just all the everything I've read and seen on those teams. It's just those guys stand together in my mind. It's not one over the other. But I know they were drafted differently, but they all played in the pros. They all had great impacts at Florida, so it was hard to really separate them the way you could like with a Harvin, for
well. Look,
example.
the Florida State defensive backs disagree with us. They would certainly put, I think, Reed Anthony there up pretty high.
Yeah, Green had a nice moment there in the '97 FSU game as well. So yeah, a lot of great Gators. This is a good thing to do in March when you're looking for some tie-ins to the brackets. So we appreciate everybody for commenting, and we look forward to doing something like that again in the future. All right, let's move on here. Some not so great news. Miles Graham, Napier, announced that the freshman linebacker will miss the remainder of spring ball due to a pre-existing back injury. Graham and the staff, they've been monitoring a situation that had been existing from his time in high school, and they felt it was best to address now than continue further and risk it being an issue over the summer and into the fall. So personally, I was hopeful that Graham would be a guy that would have an impact to be able to have an impact at that linebacker spot. I would have liked it, seen him get some extra work here in the spring, but obviously, if they think this is the right call, it seems to be the smarter choice to get it done now rather than risk it being a problem later.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. We talked about Spikes in the four. You know, you look at the Swamp Kings doc and all that sort of stuff. He didn't really step up until maybe halfway through his sophomore season, and I don't know that you can necessarily expect some giant impact from linebackers who are coming in brand new. I think the guys you're looking for really, and this gives them reps in the spring now, is guys like Pup Howard, guys like Manny Nunnery. Those are the guys who are going to have to step into the gap that's left because there's going to be extra reps. Now, it's never good when you've got back problems when you're 18 years old as a prized recruit coming in. I think to me, it's the long-term prospects that I start thinking, oh no, like hopefully this isn't something that recurs over time. But obviously we wish Miles Graham well. Hope he has a quick recovery, but also hope that guys like Pup Howard, Manny Nunnery steal his job. Because if you've got a true linebacker, if you've got a true freshman linebacker starting on day one against Miami, that's probably not great for the defense. You probably want guys who've been out there, who've had quite a bit of experience, and who have the ability to maybe step into some of that experience. Howard obviously not on the field as much last year, but still within an SEC program, experiencing that sort of stuff. So hopefully that goes forward. I'll be honest with you, the bigger injury update for me was Cam Waits is out. It's a soft tissue injury, but it looks like he's going to be out the rest of the spring. I look at that when I go, with as much trouble as Florida had on the offensive line, obviously bunch of new guys they brought in through the transfer portal, but Waits was a guy I was really looking at as somebody who might be one of those five starters. We've talked about continuity on the offensive line. So it's not just Graham. Obviously, Graham's a big deal because we haven't had great play at linebacker, but I've also released a couple articles recently looking at Pro Football Focus where linebacker play has not necessarily correlated to fantastic defense. There have been programs that have been able to get away with below average linebacker play and still be really good if they're good at safety and corner. And so that's still sort of where I'm looking at for Florida. But obviously, to me, offensive line's an area of concern. And with Waits being out, that's something that we should be monitoring as
Yeah,
well.
with the weights issue, good thing in the portal. We picked up two tackles in the portal: Crenshaw Dixon out of San Diego State and Manuel out of Arkansas are playing here. So two big bodies at the tackle position to go along with a couple guys in the recruiting class as well coming in. So definitely some more bodies there than there were in 2023. But let's move on here, Will. The SEC makes an announcement here. 2025, we will be playing the same exact schedule as 2024, except flip it. So that brutal schedule. Hopefully, we can chop it up, and maybe it's not that 5-game stretch we have this year. But either way, you're getting the same group of games next year, just at different locations. So that's the bad news. The good news is the home schedule looks phenomenal next year. It's going to be a lot of great home games. The non-conference is USF at Miami, FAMU, and FSU at home. So 3 of the 4 at home. Miami's the only one on the road. But the rest of the schedule, Georgia's obviously in Jacksonville. Mississippi State comes to Ben Hill. So does Tennessee and Texas. First trip to Gainesville. I believe they played here once in the 30s potentially, but first trip in a long time. And then we go at Kentucky, at LSU, at Ole Miss next season. So Kentucky, we'll see what they are next year. That's been a tough trip up to Lexington in recent years. LSU's always a tough trip, and Ole Miss, they seem to be built for now, but they're transfer heavy. And if Lane Kiffin ends up leaving Ole Miss after this season, that could be a different looking team in 2025 too. But still, it's just another brutal schedule for the Gators in 2025. You wrote an article about it on readingreaction.com.
Yeah, look, I mean, there's no doubt that Billy Napier is going to play probably the toughest schedule in college football history over the next 2 years. I think that was sort of one of the things that we started wondering about coming into 2024. Is this one of the toughest schedules in the history of college football? Not just like the SEC, not just in the last decade. Like, you start looking back and all these guys have always had cupcakes, and Florida's got Miami, UCF, and Florida State on the schedule, and then again Miami and Florida State again on the non-conference schedule next year, and a bunch of big boys in the SEC either coming their way or Florida having to go on the road to play them. But I think there's some positives, and that's sort of what I wanted to write about was some positives. It was interesting. You and I went back and forth last week about what's the difference between 5-7 and 7-5 and that sort of stuff. And I'm like, well, this kind of takes that out of the equation. I don't think you're going 7-5 against these. I think you're either taking major steps forward in the next 2 years if you're Napier, or you're not. Right. And if you don't, then we've got certainty on Napier. And I think that's important. I think it's good for the fan base to have certainty. I think honestly, it's good for Napier to have certainty around what he needs to accomplish and what he needs to do. And so that's one benefit of having the schedule is that you're going to have that aspect of things. The other part is that if we get a positive answer on Napier that he's the guy, Florida's going to make the playoffs because no one's going to keep an SEC team out with 3 losses with this schedule, given what you look at for the past sort of 2 or 3 seasons in terms of the college football playoff rankings. And we just saw this past year where Florida State got jumped over by an Alabama team that the committee thought was better. They're going to do a lot of that when it comes to like the 12 team, to the 11th to the 12th team this year, or the 13th and the 14th team next year. You can guarantee they're going to look at it and go, yeah, Florida went 8-4, but geez, look at who they played. And they had a last second loss to Florida State or a last second loss to Miami or something like that. Those things will start to get weighed in, especially if Florida, let's say, starts slow and then all of a sudden rolls off 8 straight wins or something like that. That's going to give them a chance to do that. I think it's better for fans. You mentioned sort of, just the quality of the home schedule. I can remember in 2018, I couldn't make it down for the LSU game, and the next best game was a Drew Lock led Missouri team, and I got to
Right.
watch Felipe Franks look terrible in 2018 against just getting shellacked by Missouri, and it was just this depressing afternoon. Now, look, the South Carolina game a week later was awesome because of the comeback, but like the thing that I had forgotten about that Missouri game is Kyle Trask actually came in, looked really good. And then during practice that week broke his foot, and so all of a sudden was out again. And they were going to switch from Felipe Franks, and then Franks ends up leading the what was 5 game winning streak at the end, including the game over Michigan. But look, that's not what I don't want to fly in for a 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock game against Missouri. Like, I want Texas, I want Oklahoma, I want Tennessee, I want Florida State, I want Miami, I want Georgia. Now, obviously, Georgia's in Jacksonville, but those are the games that fans get up for. Those are the games that fans love, and those are the games that Florida's going to get a lot of these next few years. So that I think is better for fans. And then the fourth thing, and I think this is maybe something that the people don't necessarily. It's hard to gauge. But I don't think Alabama had any business beating Georgia last year. But I think the fact that Georgia played Tennessee, Martin, Ball State, UAB, and Vanderbilt to prepare them meant that when they got hit in the mouth with Alabama, they didn't know what to do. And I think there's something to that. I think that when you play a schedule that hardens you, if you're able to sneak into the playoffs, if you're able to turn things around, if you're Billy Napier, I think there's no one who's going to be sharpened by iron any stronger than what Florida's going to be sharpened over the next 2 years. Now, look, I mean, maybe Florida goes 3-9 and we're looking at a new coach, but I actually think in some ways that's a positive because then everyone just says, yeah, it's time, and everyone's behind a move and everything sort of moves that way. But if you go 9-3 and make a playoff, you've gone, especially in 2025, you've gone through a gauntlet the last 2 years. You've got guys who are SEC tested going up against Clemson from the ACC, going up against, I'm even trying to think if you end up with a game against Liberty or something like that. Come on, man. Like like you're in the final six, final four, whatever it is, real quick because you've played better teams than that all year long and you've prepared yourself. So that's sort of where I'm at on the schedule is it's a brutal schedule. There's no doubt. In fact, the title of my article is brutal. So a bunch of people maybe didn't read it because they thought it was going to be negative, but it was actually, hey, what's the bright side of scheduling like this? And I think one of the bright sides, or I think there's four. I think you can make the playoffs. It's better for the fans. I think it prepares you. And I think we know about Billy Napier. And all four of those things are important. If we'd have played Georgia's schedule this year, Napier goes 8-5, but that doesn't mean anything, right? 8-5 against that schedule is sort of like, all right, whatever. Like, I don't care. Like, you should have done better than that. I don't think anybody's gonna. I don't think it's gonna end up being 5-7, 6-6. I think it's either going to be one side or the other. And if you've got that, then at least you know.
Yeah, and just so you know, everybody, we're not the only ones playing brutal schedules. There are some teams that are a little luckier than others with this stretch. But I looked at Alabama. Look at the SEC matchups Alabama has this year. Will they got Georgia? They go at Vanderbilt versus South Carolina. Okay. But then at Tennessee, Missouri at home. Missouri's playing some good ball right now. Missouri's projected to be a solid team again this year. At LSU, at Oklahoma, and then versus Auburn. And so you flip that next year. So you still got Auburn, Oklahoma, LSU, Tennessee, and Georgia. That's no cake. Alabama certainly had easier schedules in the past, even with the tough SEC West. They've certainly had easier stretches of SEC play than that.
Yeah, the difference is that Alabama has been good in the last decade,
I
obviously,
no, I'm not
and and
comparing. I'm
and
not comparing
so
the situation. I'm just saying that there's other teams in the SEC. I mean, Georgia too they've stepped it up big time this year with their conference schedule as well. So my
the
point is
Citadel, they're playing the Citadel.
I didn't say the non-conference. They are opening with Clemson though, but that's going to be life in the SEC is the point. I think there might be some years where you kind of luck out a little more than others. Maybe what a team is down that's not expected to be down type of thing. But I do think most years you're going to have like really 5, 6 really tough games a lot of years in the SEC.
Well, this is just preparing us for when this really turns into like quasi professional football or actually real professional football, where they divide things up into divisions, and all of a sudden it's like, hey, look, 7-6 makes makes the playoffs in whatever the AFC division in the Big Ten division of college football, because these, because every game is going to be Ohio State and Michigan every week, or Ohio State and Oklahoma, or Michigan and Alabama, or Auburn and Florida. Like, that's just going to be the game you have every week. And this is sort of a prelude to that. So if you like the fact that we're playing name teams, and to be honest, we started off with the Final Four here, and I mean, it's kind of fun to see, to see Portland State win a game, or Oakland win a game, or something like that. But at the end of the day, I really want to see North Carolina, Kansas. I really want to see Duke and Gonzaga, or something like that, right? I want to see name brands, and I know Gonzaga is sort of from the outside too, but I want to see name brand schools play once we get to the Final Eight, the Final Four. I think that's what we're going to get with some of these schedules, and certainly we're going to have name brand schools playing each other every Saturday. There isn't going to be that random Saturday in November where you look and it's like, back when we were in school, the Jefferson Pilot game of the week, where it starts at 11:30 or something like that, and it almost felt like there was a running clock because they just wanted to get it over with because whoever was playing that game was beating them by 70. Those sorts of things are going to start to go by the wayside. And I think that might be bad for the programs that were getting paid to get beat by 70. But as far as the college football fan, it's going to be really, really good to see Alabama play Georgia, to see Oklahoma play Alabama, to see Texas play Florida. Like, those are matchups that we should really be looking forward to. Now, look, on the other side, I actually think that one of the things where this is going to impact things is I haven't looked at South Carolina's schedule, or I haven't looked at Missouri's schedule, but those are the programs that really could get driven down just because they don't have the history nor the pocketbooks from their from their boosters to necessarily be able to stay up in the upper echelon. So those teams, we've made fun of, but we've penciled in Vanderbilt as a win for years now. And the question is that the right thing to do? Or are you going to start to be able to do that for the Missouris of the world and the South Carolinas of the world, and maybe even the Kentuckys of the world once Mark Stoops leaves? There might be some opportunities for those programs to really see some downtimes, and we'll see if that's the way things pan out.
I don't think you're going to have multiple 20+ year win streaks anymore. I think those days are over, but it will make for more entertaining football. Well, I'll just give you a preview. We'll save this for next week here. We're trying to keep the episode a little shorter tonight because Will's got a super early flight to catch for for business trip tomorrow here. So we'll keep it short. But the first 2 weekends here, Miami at Florida, obviously, Georgia, Clemson, and Atlanta. Kirby in those neutral site games, am I right? Notre Dame at Texas A&M. That's a little bit of an under the radar solid opener there from Mike Elko. And then on September 1st, you got LSU playing USC out in Las Vegas. By the way, Southern Cal just been on an absolute recruiting tear the last couple of days. Couple solid pickups out of Florida here. Couple guys we were after too. And then September 7th, Texas goes to the Big House in Ann Arbor to play Michigan. So right out the gate, just some really solid matchups, big time matchups for some SEC schools right out the gate. And the schedule, you're going to have at least 2 or 3 of these games almost every weekend this fall. That's not always been the case. There's been some really good weekends and then some ups and downs. It's going to be stacked. It's going to be stacked in this SEC, and I think it's going to make for a better viewing experience overall.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think for those of us who are blue blood program followers, college football is going to get better as these matchups get better on a week to week basis. What's going to happen is that the upsets aren't going to mean as much. So if you get upset by somebody, it's not going to mean as much unless your non-conference schedule sucks. So if you are playing UAB, and if you are playing, North Carolina A&T, and you are playing those sorts of teams, then an upset will be a problem. But like we saw this year, I mean, it took sort of a special circumstance for Georgia to lose the SEC championship game and still get left out of the 14 playoff. A couple years ago, we saw Georgia lose the SEC championship and win the national championship because of the way things fell for the best teams in the country. And that kind of drama will be taken out, right? It was pretty clear coming into that SEC championship weekend that if things kind of fell the right way, that if Alabama won, Georgia was going to have to be left out. And that kind of tension for those games is good. That tension is going to get ratcheted down as things start to expand. However, I do think you'll get higher quality games as things go on. And I think the scheduling, we're going to see. I mean, there might be teams that make it into the playoffs because they play easy schedules. And so maybe that's the way people will go. But I'm hoping that what will happen is the committee will reward teams that have difficult schedules and thereby incentivize people to put together difficult schedules that will then push higher quality games as we move forward. And it'll almost look like Strickland was on the front end of the scheduling stuff, which would be good because he's basically scheduled us out to like 2035, and the non-conference games aren't getting much easier.
I do believe there is a rule in the SEC now. I'll double check this for next week, but that you have to play one Power Five. It's not Power Five anymore, obviously, but one Power Five opponent now. So you're seeing that across the board, where there's better matchups, better scheduling outside of the conference. There's still those. You're going to see Western Carolina and a couple of those games in there still. I think I saw some Tennessee States and some UT Martins in there, but it's trend across the board. It's not just with Florida.
Well, and those will find their way off if schedules like Florida are rewarded. And I think one of the things that, like you and I both thought that based on sort of prior the way things have been done previously, that Florida State should have been put into the playoff last year based on the way
Mhm.
college football has always done things. But what that does suggest is that college football is about to change the way they do things. And if they're going to change the way they do things for this playoff and change the way they rank things for the playoff, well, then that means if you want better games, you're going to have to reward teams that take on those better games and
Mhm.
recognize that playing the 5 games Florida does at the end of the year this year, like let's say they go 3-2 in those games and end up 8-4. I would contend that's more impressive than a team from the ACC going 10-2. It just is. And so are we going to weigh it that way? That Florida ran a gauntlet and went 3-2 and looked really good. And hey, maybe they lost on a last second field goal at Texas or something like that. And otherwise they could have been 4-1 and 9-3 overall. Like, are we going to start talking about it that way? Or are we going to go, well, one team's 10-2, the other one's 8-4. The 10-2 team has to be in. If they're going to keep doing that, then you're going to disincentivize this sort of scheduling. The hope is that they will incentivize this sort of scheduling by actually evaluating things right. But that's also hoping that college football will do something that's good for the fans.
S-
And that's not always the way it works.
Something tells me the SEC and the Big Ten are going to be able to throw their weight around, Will, based on what we've
Um,
seen early on.
well, I mean, they have like 14 automatic qualifiers in the last 2 spots, or 12 automatic qualifiers. The last 2 spots will be for somebody else.
Yep.
So,
Yep. All right. Well, hey, let's cut it there. Thanks for joining us, everybody. We really appreciate everybody who participated in the Final Four Gators non-quarterbacks since 1990 in the comment section. And maybe we'll have to try something like that again another time. But in the meantime, we appreciate you spend some time with us this week. Have a great week, everybody, and go Gators.
hey, everybody, thanks for listening to Stand Up and Holler. If you're interested in more information from me and Nick, you can go over to readandreaction.com. You can like and subscribe our YouTube channel here at Read and Reaction, or you can go to patreon.com/readandreaction to support us, get extra information, and we do Ask Anythings over there every once in a while as well. So check us out. Thanks for listening.